All right. I think we're live.
Yeah, sure.
Welcome, everybody, to the 10th episode of Gateway Office Hours Live.
Should we have a party? It's 10.
10!
No.
10 episodes, 10 weeks straight of you guys sending us your questions, us attempting to answer them, and not get ourselves in trouble because we're on live TV.
Right.
TV.
And often reading them after the show.
Does that make me old if I say TV?
You are old.
Probably. It's like on the tube.
Yeah.
All right. Well, 10th episode, we have a new setting. We are bringing on a very special guest, which we'll get to in a little bit.
We're going to try and bring on guests, I don't know if every week now, but like...
I don't know if I can commit to something like that.
Right.
But we should.
But we're going to try and bring them on periodically.
We were talking earlier about maybe doing a live audience. I don't know. But it seems like we're locking ourselves into doing this every week.
I enjoy doing it. I just,
Yeah.
need to mix it up. I'm tired of hearing you.
Definitely. I know. I'm kind of bored with myself. Okay, so let's just chat about a couple things. There's a little bit of news this week. I'm going to leave that mostly to the news shows, but I did see something actually in my feed today. Jason Polos of Libre Day down in San Diego, he's doing the really interesting the genetically modified yeast to create cannabinoids. I know it sounds really scary.
Super cool. And he's a
super
smart guy.
And it has...
I hope you don't say that he was in the news for doing something horrible.
No, it's actually
like Jason.
good
Okay.
news. Good
Okay.
news. He just got another national grant to continue the study of production of cannabidiol, CBD.
Oh, cool.
Which is really cool. I mean, there's a couple things cool about that. A, it's an alternative way of getting funding as a biotech startup, which is very capitally intensive. But it's also the national government showing a show of support of some level of study of cannabinoids.
Yeah. I mean, it's great. And I know a lot of people get annoyed at what Jason is doing, but
Yeah.
I really love what he's doing. He's a smart guy, and I know there are people who are doing things kind of similar, or at least on the surface similar. But I spent some time looking at his patents and some other people's patents, and what he's doing is unique and super cool. So, he's a great founder, and but before he can do something like Gateway or even worry about business, he's got a lot of science to still do. So
yeah. So it's super interesting. If you actually haven't heard about the genetically modified yeast, the accelerated production of cannabinoids without growing the plant, definitely something cool to look into. Do a little bit of Googling. It's all over there. Another bit of news, kind of like as we approach November, approach the vote. I just heard on Marijuana Today Daily, Hezekiah Allen has publicly come out. Hezekiah is the executive director of
CGA,
the CGA, California Growers Alliance, has come out against the AUMA and publicly said that he's voting no against Prop 64.
Yeah, that was the big fear that I would have, that there'd be some kind of infighting in the industry. And
Which is interesting because his organization, 31% yes, 31% no, and I guess that leaves a large handful of people kind of either
his organization
uncertain.
is 31 no and 31 yes. Huh?
Yeah, so a large that says one thing, and the large chunk are undecided or abstaining.
Yeah.
But it's interesting for him to come out and declare that, which
What were his reasons?
I haven't dug into it.
Oh, okay.
And I don't know. It's
Tweet
like,
his reasons at us if anyone has done homework that we should have done.
Yeah.
I didn't-
It is interesting. I mean, as far as moving the industry forward, we've said on this show before that, a yes vote is, a move in the right direction. No legislation is going to be perfect, and it's going to be a continual fight.
Right.
So we might as well win this battle and keep moving the ball forward. Some people feel otherwise.
Yeah.
And understandably, from the perspective of someone interested in their self-interest as far as, protecting their business in its current state and form, I guess I can see it, but...
Yeah, I mean, I view this as a tactical disagreement, not a philosophical disagreement, so...
Sure.
Okay. I don't agree with the tactics, but that doesn't mean I'm right or they're right, so...
Okay. So those are the two kind of like things that just popped up in my feed today, actually.
Okay.
Anything else that you were seeing in the news this week that?
Well, I really like how Chelsea Clinton thinks marijuana can kill you and then backpedaled. That was great.
Well, she didn't backpedal. The campaign's
entourage
backpedaled.
Yeah.
Like, that was stupid.
Oh, oops. Sorry, Mom. Yeah.
Yeah. So marijuana does not kill people. There are no proven drug interactions with other substances that prove to be detrimental.
Yes. But the Clintons do. We're not
Clin-
allowed to talk about politics. Okay. So, next. Next.
Going back to that whole not getting in trouble thing. Episode 10. All right. Let's go back into what we're better at, and that's startups. We had a little bit of a longer show last time. We didn't really get to one of the topics we wanted to talk about. Something that kept coming up as we drove towards Demo Day a few weeks ago.
Yep.
And especially at Demo Day, a lot of questions that arose in the crowd. Questions around what's your exit opportunity, what's the valuation, et cetera, et cetera. A lot of financially oriented questions. Many startups maybe it's not that they're ill prepared. It's just that they're might be focusing on different things. How do you typically, what is our advice, for startups that are going into their first major round of fundraising? What are they trying to sell? What information should they be providing to potential investors? And I guess that's kind of a very open question because it depends on what stage of the conversation, et cetera, et cetera. Let's start with the pitch. Like, what are you trying to get across?
Well, this is actually kind of a complicated question because, first of all, it depends what stage you're at raising, right? And so if you're raising angel money and you don't have a huge track record of recent sales and blah, 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 that is going to continue, right? Even if you had recent sales and you're like, say, restarting your business or changing something major about it and you're going to moving forward on a new brand or a new product line or with new customers, so if you're kind of in that startup stage and you're raising angel money, or in most cases you have no customers yet or whatever.
Sure.
The answer to that is different than if you are raising Series A and you've got or Series B or whatever, and you've got a huge track. If you've got a track record, you absolutely have to the investment becomes much more economic driven, right? And it's like, oh, well, what have your economics been in the past? Let me look at your projections. Let me see that your past history matches what you're saying your unit economics are, and that's going to be the same moving forward, and kind of an understanding there, and it becomes much more of a financial discussion. For earlier stage companies or the companies that are in the category I just said, I think there's disagreement about what to say, and I have my opinion, which I'll voice.
So we've been at multiple pitch competitions where it's been like, where are your 5-year projections and what's your exit opportunity?
Right. Yeah, and so I think partly the answer is it depends on the investor, but I'm going to defend my answer, which is I want to see unit economics in your pitch. So I want to see unit economics, right? Are your cost to acquire, your lifetime value, basically it's the engine. It's kind of the core engine. It's like, okay, look, I know this little engine works, and if we threw gas into it, it would, blow up in a great way. Horrible metaphor, but whatever. This engine works. We just need to scale. And so to me, unit economics are a lot more important. And you absolutely need to have detailed financials because even at an early stage, they want to dig in, an investor wants to dig in and see that you have an understanding of the bells and whistles and the knobs that you can adjust and the levers that you can pull to change things,
I've even seen spreadsheets with highlighted cells here, change these numbers. And
so what I do when I do my financial model is exactly that. I have a separate issue or separate spot in the spreadsheet that says assumptions at the top of it, and it's the only cells that you're supposed to change. Right. Obviously I change things as I think about the business and maybe add a new revenue line or take something away or change, but in terms of mucking with it and sending it off to investors, it's basically a play with me section, right? And it's like, oh, here are my assumptions I'm making, and here's why I'm making these assumptions, right? And you can muck with those, and everything is derived from those assumptions, and the whole model, numbers adjust. Yeah. And the reason that's important is it shows that you understand the finances of your business, even if the projections are bullshit, which everyone kind of knows. Until you have some past performance, you don't really know what the financials are actually going to be. And so that's super important. However, I don't like to see it in the pitch. What I like to see is just unit economics in a first pitch, right? And maybe some statements about where you think the revenue will be, but I don't like detailed finances in the first pitch. I do think they should be in the appendix, and I think they're a follow-on discussion that you should absolutely be prepared to have, but I don't like to see them in the pitch. Some people disagree, and we even had, we had people at Demo Day. Actually, someone yesterday even said to me, it was kind of funny. They said, well, we got a bunch of meetings with these investors, but the investors, there was like 3 different investors or something that they got out of Demo Day who said this. They said, oh, we really liked your pitch, but it was a little salesy, like it wasn't enough into the financial details. Mm-hmm. And this founder was saying that to me is like, well, maybe we should have more financial details in the pitch. And my response was, the point of the pitch was to get the meeting.
Yeah.
You got the meeting.
Yeah.
Did you talk about the financial details in the meeting? Yes. There you go.
Right,
That's the point. The point is not to convince them of the economics. It's to get the meeting.
So we've told that to people many times. You don't need to have the whole kit and caboodle like all in the pitch, right? Like leave a little bit to be discussed. The whole point of the pitch is to get to the next discussion.
That's my philosophy on it, right?
So I wanted
but you do have to show that you get that there's a business here, and you like.
It has to be a business.
I understand there are economics, and here's my unit economics, and here's some projections, and I will happy to sit down with you and with my spreadsheet and go.
So I just for the sake of the audience, unit economics. It's something that we often have to educate young founders on. Really quickly, there's a couple acronyms, buzzwords that come up in these discussions. Yeah, the cost of customer acquisition, or the CAC. The LTV, the lifetime value. The nice thing about these two numbers is like, this is how much it costs me to find a customer. This is how much that customer is worth.
Yep.
And then you go into market size, right? You talk about how large the market is, how many of those people there are, and it's simple math. It's like, is this easily going to become a multi-million-dollar business? Is it going to be $1 billion business? And that's the level of finance that I like to see in the first pitch. If I can do the quick mental math, then you have something good.
Yeah, I kind of like to see both top down and bottom up. So you're kind of describing a bottom up, like here's what people will pay, here's how many people there are. Ergo, here's my potential. Yeah. I like to see that, and also some indication that like I've done a top down. Here's the general market. This is what people are spending on this kind of thing, and look down, and those that's something you should do as a founder, just as a sanity check on yourself. Like, oh yeah, these numbers are in the same ballpark. It's a good sanity check. It's amazing how many times founders will do like one but not the other. Like they'll do the bottom up, and they'll be like, wow, I can make $1 billion in 5 years, and it's like the whole market is $1 billion. Like or whatever, or $500 million. Like you're not gonna when you do the top down, you realize the numbers don't match. And they can do it the other way around too, where they say things, a pet peeve of mine in the cannabis industry is when people have a slide that says like, the cannabis industry is this big. Sure.
Yeah.
You're not building something that's in the cannabis industry. That's too broad.
Sure.
Right. And so the question is like, what's your segment?
Yep. Well, and then that goes into our, what I'm often saying in interviews with reporters and everything is just like, someday we will think of cannabis very similar to how we think of the internet and stuff like that. It's just like, you don't talk about the market opportunity of the web. You talk about a certain vertical within that web, right?
I hate to go on a tangent, but you reminded me of something. Speaking of talking to reporters, did you have anything to do with the Entrepreneur Magazine thing that came out yesterday?
I don't know. I read through it really quick, and they had mentioned a conference that we didn't attend, so I don't know if I did.
We got someone put us on a list of like top 10 startups to watch in cannabis, which is
it's an honor.
It's an honor. It's also weird because we're like a startup kind of, but also
that was
startups.
So that was my tweet. So Michael Finkbeiner tweeted out to us. I think it was Michael, and basically my response is like, well, if you think we're good, you should probably take a look at our first cohort because they're much better.
Yeah.
And they're more representative of startups.
Mm-hmm.
In defense of the reporter, I guess you can't throw 7 awesome startups on there and have them all be gateway companies.
Yeah. Well, hey, I'm not going to
complain. A little tooting our own horn.
I just wondered.
Thank you for pointing that out, Carter.
Well, I just honestly, I was just like, Is
Do you want to talk about the
talking to
SF
someone,
Business
like-
Times that we were in yesterday as well?
No, I just want to talk about. Yeah, sorry. Okay, I'll shut up with self promotion.
All right.
Um,
Enough about us.
Yeah.
Um,
So that was we had a unique economics discussion. I think
we
covered
did.
that pretty.
We
well.
had the unit economics.
Okay.
We bragged about ourselves, which is an important point of being an entrepreneur. We can talk about that sometime else. But what I really want to get to today, and what I'm really excited about, is introducing our good friend Layla. She's sitting back here behind camera number 4.
Wow.
And
Camera number 4.
yeah, I'm feeling guilty that it took us this long to even get her on, but
We haven't had guests.
I know.
I mean,
we're figuring it out.
Fill-ins for you.
No,
But we haven't
it's
had
classic,
guests.
right? Like we announced that she's here, and then we loop people into like watching us for 15 minutes before we actually bring
Right,
her on.
because Layla, you're the excitement. Do you want to? Can we just invite her on now? Is that
We
cool?
can invite her on. I do want to intro her. Like,
Oh.
I
Can we intro her with her sitting here or no?
should we get her and then intro?
And here's the no.
Layla, come on down.
Yeah.
Sorry, that probably maxed out on the mic.
Yeah, who knows?
Hey, thanks, guys.
I'm trapped. I'll hug you later.
Okay. How about
We'll fist bump.
thing? Yeah.
Wonder Twin powers.
All right.
Thanks for having me. In here.
All right.
Do we got our next mic on?
Yeah, we're on. So, Layla is the founder of Startup Documents and a whole bunch of other stuff. I want to say I didn't tell you this before the show when we were talking. Don't worry about the cameras. I have the same problem. Yesterday we were interviewing someone for Cohort 2, and they randomly said to us like, "Oh, I just used Startup Documents to do my incorporation. It was really easy." And I was like, "Yes,
Cool.
fucking awesome."
Yeah, it was
so.
super awesome.
Yeah.
I that may have been my recommendation.
Oh, really?
You know, a lot of
Nice.
the
Oh
start-
man,
I'm
you're
sorry.
like popping. You're like bursting my bubble.
I know, but a lot of the startups reach out to us like beforehand, like, what can I do to like improve my chances of getting
Oh,
into
fair
the
enough.
program?
I thought it was just random, and I was like, "That's awesome."
Yeah.
Well, thank
Can,
you.
can I?
Thanks,
I'm just
Ben.
gonna pretend it's random.
No. But to further introduce Layla, I mean, you've been a big part of my entrepreneurial journey. You were one of the first people I ever pitched to, and you've just kind of been along the way with me, like, and we both kind of have like gone these different routes and like started different ventures and all that kind of stuff, and it's just been really awesome to
You
work
co-founded
alongside
guys,
you.
right?
We did, yes.
Yeah,
we
admit
did.
it. You were in a relationship.
Yeah. Our
Yeah.
Co-founder.
my first failure.
We co-founded a company. It was an app. It was called Gateway. It was really cool.
Yeah.
And then somehow I disappeared, and you came along.
Yeah. Well,
Well,
You know.
it kind of
that story is all too common, Layla. Perhaps we'll talk about it.
the funny thing is that
Maybe
it
next
did-
time, yeah.
like every time I tell my story, it's like it was a complete foreshadowing of what we do now. It's just the fact that it really does, hurrying startups along and helping launch really does, need the human element. And technology hasn't really caught up to the point where we can, use an app or use virtual reality to kind of replace that. Someday we will get there, and maybe we'll relaunch. And
Yeah, no. Well, I mean, first of all, thank you so much, both of you, for having me here. This is really, really exciting, and to be your first guest is awesome.
We love you,
And
Layla.
you haven't said it yet, but I think you want me to be here every week, so I will be.
Sure.
you can take.
And
my
of
place.
course, Ben and I started a very, very different company. It was not called Gateway, and I think we did quite well with the planning process and figuring out what we were trying to do, and that's a really important part of startups life cycle. And along the way, we learned from each other, and we continue to. And I think that I'm for sure very grateful for that. And I'm really proud of you guys. Gateway is incredible, and you've seen my tweets about it. I tell people about it when I can. I try and support you guys however I can, and I'm always here for you guys. Whatever we can do to work together and support each other. I believe what you're doing is really, really important.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We really love it. Can I ask you to pimp Startup Docs just a little bit and tell people about what it is, because it's a really cool
Sure.
thing.
Sure. Yeah, it's very simple. So I'm the founder of a law firm that I started 6 years ago, and we worked primarily with early stage companies. We used to, anyways, and realized that it's not very efficient for them to spend all this money on lawyers at such an early stage in their companies. So we basically automated a lot of the things we were doing for early stage companies, put it on this website called Startup Documents. It's at startupdocuments.com. And so everything from company formation to some of the core legal documents are on there. It's a small flat fee to use it, and it's important to me because it enables founders to spend money on things like product, which are way more important than spending on legal services at the early stages. So, and the idea is, maybe at one point when they're farther along, they'll come back to us and use our legal services at Bedrock. But, sometimes not, and that's fine too. We launched it for our clients at our law firm, saw how successful it was, and then launched it to the public. So it's been awesome.
Those are like cool success stories where it's like, oh, we built this because we needed it, and then it became a thing.
Right,
So,
yeah. No, it's been fantastic.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
And Layla was also a mentor at the Founder Institute, which is where I met you.
Right.
And one of my favorite mentors at the Founder Institute.
Thank you very
And so-
much, yeah.
And I think we've mentored a lot together since
We
then, I
have.
think.
We
Yeah.
certainly have.
So-
Yep, in Silicon
and good.
Valley and San Francisco. It's
Yeah.
been really wonderful.
Yeah. Cool. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, Ben. You sounded like you were like
No,
on
I'm
a train
enjoying
to
this
go
love
somewhere with
fest.
the
This is
conversation
great.
and like
It's complete love
Yeah.
fest. Okay, let's graduate the conversation
All right.
to the next level and just really I don't know. I want to kind of grill you as a founder, and also just get your advice to our audience.
By the way, everyone who's watching this can't see, but there is actually a live audience here, and there's a big glass wall over there, and there's a lot of people who cheer and stand up, and when
Right.
you guys walk in, you can't hear them because it's a big
Right.
thick glass wall. But
yeah. Well, we don't like to mess with the proletariat, so we put the glass wall up in between.
yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe that.
But
maybe
people
we'll
should
break
know that
wall
there is
down.
an audience
Actually,
here.
speaking about the live audience, our one live audience guy isn't here today, which is
Patrick, he's on a plane.
Yeah, our giggle guy is not here.
Giggle
There's no
guy.
giggles in the background. So,
No. But I mean, I do
yeah.
love that idea. I
June,
mean-
you can giggle if you want. Go ahead. No, he's not gonna get. He's sending me an angry text right now, probably.
Okay, so we'll keep this conversation startup legal. I do want to actually, not to put you on the spot, but you are kind of one of our linkages is, and one of our visions with Gateway is to kind of bridge the gap between the cannabis industry and mainstream. There was a little bit of apprehension when we were first launching Gateway about its focus on cannabis. You being mainstream and an attorney, you're now sitting here on our show, which I personally take as a compliment and a big step. Can you just explain kind of how that thought process and mental journey occurred? We talk to a lot of people in the mainstream and a lot of investors, and many are kind of turning the corner. But I would just like to hear it verbalized a little bit.
Yeah, sure. So we were talking about this not too long ago. It's very important, I think, for an infrastructure of support to exist for all different kinds of companies, and especially the disenfranchised ones, which we'd mentioned earlier. So, that's a major part of it. And I can't speak too much about cannabis simply because I don't know much about it, but I do feel that in every type of business, in most, what we can say, certainly the disenfranchised businesses, cannabis and perhaps some of the adult toys and I'm not sure, what else can we sort of name off right
Gambling
now?
can be sometimes.
Yeah, gambling, the legal services, really highly regulated industries,
Mm-hmm.
financial services, insurance, healthcare. There's a lot that can be done which will benefit a very, very large number of people, and there's no reason why we shouldn't find ways to do that. And so I think that's the starting point for me, and certainly with legal tech, my involvement at Stanford, at Codex, and launching these legal tech startups and helping others to launch them. It's part of this journey to advance that that goal.
Cool. Great. And legal in the cannabis industry is a big opportunity. And actually, when you were first starting Startup Documents, legal tech is a big opportunity in of itself. And so, I'm only imagining the combination of these two is a huge opportunity.
Absolutely, yeah. And so, what we've done at Startup Documents is not really that innovative. And I have to say, I'm surprised that more law firms don't do it. That more founders in the legal tech space aren't even doing the most simplest things and maybe sometimes overthink things too much. But all we've done is we've taken this approach, this sort of the if this then that model. You type in something, if a certain text is typed or a box is selected or a button is clicked on, then these clauses are rearranged in this manner exactly, and then the document is then generated for you. One step ahead of that, we're talking about different kinds of automation. We're talking about machine learning and all the different types of things you can do with data science. We're talking about, after that, maybe that's 2 steps behind artificial intelligence, which is many steps behind things like neural lace and the idea of having a chip inside your brain that, will sort of act as your iPhone screen. So this is the path I think that we're on, and there's companies that are already making those sort of later stage advancements, and it's a mistake to not try and push the boundaries with technology.
Yeah, I mean, there are people doing some of the. I hate actually saying AI because AI doesn't actually exist. It's just like machine learning and some other stuff, but it's not.
Yeah,
actually, but it's the term, so I'll use it.
Right.
But there are people doing like AI legal stuff now, but not a lot, and I don't know how well they're doing. Do you know the legal robot guy, Dan?
Mm-hmm. Dan Rubens, yeah.
Yeah, we've had someone use his service for looking at term sheets, but I think it's a slog. It's not easy to do.
Yeah, it's not. We haven't seen really good examples of AI in solving some of the more intricate subjective problems that we see in legal services.
Yeah.
So I think there is a place for machine learning and data science, but I don't think that people, and certainly attorneys and regulators, shouldn't look at it as a means to replace lawyers. I think it's a means to create new jobs in an industry that needs it.
Cool. And just make it more efficient.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, in the cannabis industry also, there's the, the startups that come through Gateway have this issue, at least the ones that touch the plant, right, where they need legal expertise on the startup side because they need to go raise venture capital at some point, and they need everything to be, all their ducks need to be in a row. It needs to look the way that Sequoia wants it to look, or maybe not Sequoia, but they need to make it look, the way that a VC wants it to look. The flip side is there's always another entity in those cases where there's a relationship between the two entities, and the other entity is the one that actually touches the plant, and just staying abreast of all the cannabis law is actually quite difficult.
Right.
And there aren't a lot of people who really understand the cannabis law
Yeah.
as well. And those people generally don't understand the startup stuff. And startup stuff, people generally don't understand the cannabis stuff. And so it's
Right.
You're ending up with 2 legal teams generally.
Yeah, so a lot of people ask me, why don't more lawyers launch their own apps? And I think, I'm not, or maybe another way to put it is, why don't more lawyers engage in engage legal technology in their own practices and implement it more? Because I think there is still a very large gap in what's available and what can be done and what's actually being adopted more on a regular basis. And so maybe one of the answers might be that in highly regulated industries where you have licensed professionals involved, they may not know what's permitted and what's not permitted in their own practices. They may not understand, or they may be afraid of the repercussions either from regulators or from clients about what they can and can't do with technology in their practices. And all of these things, are a risk. We take risks when we launch businesses. We take risks when we, are involved in highly regulated industries such as cannabis. We're constantly taking risks, and I think that there's no possible way we can plan ahead to solve for everything, but we just have to, try our best and understand that it's a lot of those risk takers that are really changing the world, and I think we need to support them. So I want to see more of that. I want to see companies pitching with some real risk-taking, problem-solving stuff that is not just incrementally improving on what's already there, but introducing new things. And I think that you guys, are going to be doing that here.
We hope so. We like to see that as well. Yeah. So do you have any advice for startups looking for a lawyer? Like, okay, let's say they do startup documents, but they know that gets them to a point, but they're going to need a relationship with someone afterwards. And you tend to be really picky about who you work with, so you'll probably turn them down just because you seem
Probably.
to turn a lot of people down. So, like, how do they vet a lawyer? Like, what should they do?
Right. So the best way to find a lawyer is to talk to other startup founders. That's it's just like any other professional that you want to work with. Finding a lawyer is really, you have to find someone who's a good match for your personality. I think this is someone who you want to spend time with, who you trust, who you can speak with very openly and honestly, and you have to have sort of some of the same interests. And I think there's a lot that goes into selecting who the right lawyer should be. So I think maybe don't go to Yelp to find your lawyer. I really rely on your personal network. You guys are a great resource for that. And there's so many good, meetup groups out there. So I don't think, you can contact any, startup incubator. Try and talk to as many different lawyers as you can, and you'll get an idea of what you like and what you don't like. But, cost is not a single the most important factor in selecting a lawyer. I think that most people are worried about that. There's a lot that you can do on your own in the early stages. There's a lot of great technology out there aside from startup documents. So I think that people ought to really use their personal network to find, whether it's a lawyer or your co-founder or your technical person. You really ought to just dig into your personal network and just put yourself out there is the best way to do it.
How important is it to get like the Oryx and the Perkins Coie's and like the big name WSGR?
Yeah, so I think it goes without saying that the very large law firms like Oric and WSGR, Fenwick and West, fantastic law firms, and I have friends who are partners there. I go to their events; they're really wonderful. But everyone knows that large law firms have a very particular infrastructure of support that's set up for large businesses. It was not initially set up for very, very small businesses. Yeah. So the type of service and attention that you get when you go to a large law firm that basically is sort of like this pyramid, pyramid economics where you have, few partners at the top, junior partners underneath them, and then, larger number of maybe senior associates than associates, and all this support staff. I mean, it's a very expensive infrastructure to basically support. Right. And so, I think for those large firms that are offering services to startup companies, they often do it on a deferred fee basis. That's just one model, but all that means is you're going to be billed later on. It doesn't mean we're writing off your bill.
And sometimes it's $600 an hour, so it's not cheap.
Or more for the firm she's talking about. Yeah.
Sure, and then yeah. In the end, what ends up actually happening is the partner that signed you on is probably not going to be spending a lot of time on your startup. It's probably going to go to some admin or a junior associate or someone who is also working on 600 other startups. Yep. So, you just need to be very, very aware of that. And that's the reason when we were working with startups, we did get a lot of startup companies from large firms transfer to us. Yep. Because they knew that, there's only 3 of us. They knew who they were going to work with.
Yeah. And there are cases, I don't know if I should, it's a rumor that's on the internet, so I'll just say it because it must be true. But like DLA Piper, for example, has a reputation of you're not actually even getting a DLA lawyer, either like outsourcing to another firm when you're an early stage startup. So you think you're signing up with DLA, and actually, you're getting some other lawyers.
For the large, I've heard that too. I don't have much knowledge of it, but I do know that for large firms, in order for that approach that we just talked about to make sense, it is a numbers game. You have to take on like 1,000 startups for one of them to be Google and make it worth it for everyone else.
And and they're intentionally playing that game. That
sure,
they know that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So interesting. Are there any recommendations you would make? So you said talking to other founders. How important is it to get a lawyer who specializes in like startup corporate law versus like Uncle Joe who, I'm an attorney. I'm an IP attorney in the entertainment industry. I can do this for you. Like how important it is to do that.
I think it's very important. We when we stopped working with really, really early stage companies, we shifted our focus primarily to tech licensing negotiations for enterprise. So we are a tech licensing law firm now. We do some real estate work as well, but our primary focus is tech licensing. And so, we drill down very narrowly into a very niche market.
Mm-hmm.
And even more so than that, we are the tech licensing firm for Salesforce negotiations. And Dreamforce is going on right now, so it's a good time to mention it. But
They should be cutting out the time then.
yeah. So, I think that it is very important because what happens is when you've done hundreds of tech licensing negotiations with enterprise companies like Google and GE and Tesla, you can anticipate all of the questions that they're going to ask, and you can anticipate all of the problems that may arise down the road, maybe in a few years, when the relationship is already established, when the technology is integrated into their systems, what might arise and how might we solve it. And we can anticipate those things and have a conversation about them early on and incorporate them into the contracts. Same way that a startup lawyer, good experienced startup lawyer, will have those conversations with you early. They should be asking about the details of your company. What is it that you're doing? They should ask industry specific questions about what you're doing, and give you guidance on that, because they know exactly what the investors, the VCs, the angels, are and your customers are going to be looking for, and the hard questions they're asking. So I think that it makes a lot of sense to work with someone who's very specialized.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense.
Yep, not Uncle Joe.
Not Uncle Joe. Damn it, Uncle Joe's so great. I know this isn't really necessarily a cannabis startup question, but you're not a cannabis startup person. So, what are you seeing? I mean, you do a lot of mentoring for organizations and stuff, and you see a lot of startups. Any trends and what's going on in the startup world from your perspective right now? What's hot?
Yeah, I think it's just a lot more interesting things with figuring out how people can use data in unusual, unique ways to create value in that respect. I'm seeing a lot of interest in VR. I'm seeing a lot of interest in some form of artificial intelligence, whatever that means. So I can see that people are very excited about this new technology. Wearables, I'm seeing still maybe less hot than it was last year. I am seeing an upward trend in more philanthropic startups.
Oh, social good startups and stuff. Okay.
So and I do believe that Y Combinator is about to come out with, or has already come out with, a fund specifically for those types of startups.
Yeah, I heard a rumor about that, but I don't know if I don't know the details. Is it a fund? Is that what it is?
I believe that they're going to do that, but I don't know 100%.
Yeah.
I think that kind of mirrors what we've been seeing a lot in cannabis. There's, actually, so we've been running interviews right now for our next cohort, and I think just about every other founder that has come in is talking about how their big vision is to leverage the data that they're collecting. One of our recent grads, Willow, Chris Liu, he's doing kind of the Q&A. So it's basically like a chat, it's a live chat right now, essentially is what it is.
Right.
But they're collecting every question and answer and building this database. And in the past month, they've built a database of 800 questions and answers. And they're going to start leveraging that to provide the kind of the real-time AI assistance. But now, the more pitches that we hear, it's people are trying to figure out when does that data first enter the system and how do they collect it and own it. So you have companies like Confident Cannabis, who's already in the industry. I think a Y Combinator grad.
I think so, yeah.
And they're kind of doing the lab data. So everything coming in is tested, and that information goes into a database. We're talking to people who are running CRM systems, and they're oh well, they actually see the flow of all product. And so it's really interesting. There's Headset. Cy Scott was recently at Elevate. They're collecting at the POS level, and it's really kind of cool to see this emerging market, but all the technology that has already emerged in the tech industry, and just it being bombarded with it. So we'll see where it leads and see who comes out on top. But there's people are definitely looking at data in the cannabis space too.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. We're seeing more hardware now too, and I'm seeing that. Are you seeing hardware generally in startups as well? Because I'm seeing an upsurge an uptick in hardware startups, and we've even this cohort we have way more hardware applicants than we did last cohort.
Yeah, I'm seeing some more hardware. I'm seeing so I'm seeing higher quality startups in the hardware space because it actually is much more expensive to launch. So I think they have to be really good in order to be fundable.
Yeah.
You know, it's very expensive to build hardware, and you know, you have to move it off the shelf, and you know, so I think that
Yeah.
essentially, I think it what happens is when these startups get to a certain stage where we do hear about them, they're already pretty good and pretty interesting.
Yeah, you just don't hear about a lot of the other. The
Exactly,
other ones,
yeah.
As they say, hardware is hard. I think something like, we may have mentioned this before on the show, but I think something like 90% of the hardware startups that get funded on Indiegogo never ship. Because it turns out to be a lot harder than you thought. Right? You've got your CAD
People
files
come up
and your
with great
video,
ideas,
and,
but they
it's
don't know
like,
about like you know.
oh, I can't actually manufacture this.
And so what do they
Oops.
just they refund the?
I don't know what
Nice.
happens. I think
Yeah.
it's a problem that
Interesting.
Indiegogo doesn't like
Yeah,
to talk
maybe
about.
they just move somewhere
I
else.
don't know. Yeah. Here's our next
I
one.
think it's in the small prints, like, sorry, we're not responsible for that.
Yeah. But it is a real problem.
Or if it does ship, it's just like way too late. Like I got my coin like 2 years after I wanted it, and it's like everything had moved to the chip, and my coin didn't have a chip, and I was just like, well, shit. Just
Are you the person I was talking to who got their coin and just threw it in the garbage right away?
Yep.
Yeah. It's like, thanks. Threw it in the garbage. Yeah.
Anyhow, yeah, the hardware is interesting. You know, the barrier of entry has definitely lowered. You know, 3D printing, kind of people are really learning about or facilitating kind of like how to work with China and get that kind of like those smaller production runs made.
Yeah.
And like the people we're interviewing, though, like you point out, they are on their like second or third prototype, and they've kind of figured out kind of like that chain of the supply chain and everything. So.
Yeah, you know, I just finished reading this book by Phil Knight. He's the founder of Nike, and he wrote Shoe Dog, which is a fantastic book. It's his, you know, it's an autobiography, basically, his recollection of how Nike became what it became. So, of course, it's one person's perspective.
Right.
But it is still, despite that, very insightful, and he does talk about, you know, going from Japanese manufacturers to U.S. manufacturers, back to Chinese manufacturers, and, you know, what it's like working with all of that. But, you know, I think that companies like Nike and some of the larger companies that had some massive importation of goods that were manufactured overseas have paved the way for a lot of companies now, and we ought to pay attention to their stories. So I highly recommend that book, Shoe Dog. Fantastic read.
Cool. So, talking about hardware stuff, great.
We're
I
not
kind of
talking
feel
about
like that was a
Nike?
weird. Well, we had been talking. Yeah. What, just like general, you've seen a lot of pitches. I kind of want. I know I'm looking at the time, trying to figure out how to wrap up. But you've seen a lot of pitches and stuff. You see a lot of startups. Do you have any advice for people pitching? Like, what do you like to? Because you were sitting over there when we were talking about what I like to see in the economics and pitches. But like, what do you? I don't know. What are your pet peeves? What are the things you like to see in pitches?
Yeah, you know, so I like to see. I certainly like to see the confidence in a founder about what they're doing, and that's something that you can't fake very easily. You know, and I try and tell founders when they're pitching, before they even pitch publicly, to pitch, set up their, you know, cameras on their phones or whatever, to record themselves and to view themselves maybe 20 or 30 times before they actually take it public. I tell people that all the time, and I think that's very important. You know, watch yourself and how you pitch, what you do with your hands, you know, what your story is. Do you start well? Do you end well? You know, people who are listening to your pitch really want to know and feel secure that you're the one that is the right person for this particular task. And so I think that there's an element of confidence that's often overlooked. And, you know, you don't have to be an expert in the field. You can become an expert in the field. I don't think that a legal tech startup requires lawyers to start it. I think there's lots of great reasons for non-lawyers to start legal tech startups.
Legal Robot isn't founded by lawyers.
Exactly, right, right. And Dan Rubens is a very smart guy. So I think that's the big thing is just to be very confident. You have to have a great knowledge base about what you're doing. But, to a certain extent, when we talk about numbers in that first pitch, when we talk about, these sort of hockey stick graphs, I know a lot of VCs that are quite offended by those in some of the pitches, and they feel like, well, actually, I should know better than you what this is actually going to look like. And it's not hard to look at something that, some hockey stick chart and basically see, like, how did you arrive at this number? You're making $400 million in your second year,
Right.
and it's just, I think people need to understand that VCs and investors, they're not stupid.
Right.
So, and it's okay to not know things, but I agree with what you said earlier, that the purpose of this pitch, the purpose of your decks, is really just to get that relationship, to get that first meeting. Yeah. So, I think that's my advice, if that's sort of a little bit all over the place, but
yeah, no, I think that's super helpful. Can you so you can't fake confidence? Can you gain confidence?
Sure. I think the best way is just to be knowledgeable about what you're talking about. Do incredible amount of research in advance. Know more than everyone else. Marissa Mayer gets a lot of slack for a lot of things, but one thing she does do really well is she is constantly reading. And I actually know her hairdresser. And the hairdresser was telling me she is constantly reading. I'm cutting her hair, and she is just reading all the time. Articles, everything. And there's stuff all over her place about, whatever, news. And so I think, what does that mean? I think it means that this is someone who's trying to stay ahead and, trying to be more knowledgeable about the person they're sitting next to. So if you're trying to pitch something and you don't know as much as you can about it, you're going to get caught up in that eventually. So
it's good advice.
I think that's really good advice. And one thing that VCs and, well, generally people in general are really good at is detecting bullshit. And so, like, along with confidence, like, it's okay if you don't know the answer to something. Just be confident that you don't know, right? It's okay. It's like, oh, I don't know, but I will certainly find out.
Oh, yeah, sure. Yeah. And by confidence, I don't mean try and put on a show about, pretending. It's nothing to do with that. It really is about actually knowing.
Yeah. Know your domain, but when you don't know, like, just be upfront about it and be confident in the fact that it's like you can't know everything. And if you ever find yourself starting to bullshit, just, like, check yourself and acknowledge it. Like, there's nothing worse than seeing someone ramble on and bullshitting.
Yeah. I don't think it was a Gateway, but there was someone I was talking to relatively recently, and they did something that I really actually appreciated. I asked them a question about their market, and instead of they didn't know the answer, and they probably should have known the answer. And instead of bullshitting, or instead of just saying, "Well, gee, I don't know," because a lot of people, if they go the honest route, they just kind of say, like, "Gee, I don't know that number." But there's, like, no curiosity that happens after that. This person actually said, "Oh, I don't know, I should know that. Hold on." And, like, pulled out their phone and, like, had a conversation while they Googled the answer. And it's this. I'm like, oh,
not to call someone out, but was that Blaine? Because I think I had
might have been Blaine.
I had a very similar reaction, like, at the same time. I'm like, ha!
Thank
I like
you.
that. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. Thank you. That's what I want.
Okay. Let's wrap this up. We've gone long.
How long are we supposed to go?
Well, we could adopt an hour. I mean, we actually.
It's almost an hour
on
now.
Facebook. I think she has stuff to do. It is
Probably.
Dreamforce.
Yeah.
She is a licensing.
She's probably
attorney.
$700 an hour or whatever. So, yeah.
I'll send you the bill later.
Thanks. Yeah.
Layla,
Oh, wait. Can I ask you a question?
Yeah, sure.
Does this work?
Yeah.
Can you? I've invited my lawyer to lunch, and not been charged for it. Just by, like, I'll pay for lunch, and, like, does it work, or do lawyers, like, usually bill you for lunch?
I think it depends. I've never billed a client for a lunch I've had with them.
Okay.
I think, the understanding is that we're having lunch and it's a casual conversation. Because I think, you have to be very clear. The engagement letters usually say that, you're getting billed for the services that you're providing. And the services you're providing are counseling. So if the purpose of your lunch is to get counseling, or the majority of your lunch is, this lawyer's counseling on you on stuff, then they probably have a right to bill you. But I think that, what I would do if I was a lawyer is probably just give you a heads up that, hey, since we're talking about stuff, I mean, it's probably going
This
to get
could be
billed.
billable.
Yeah, it
Yeah,
could be
yeah.
billable. Or would you prefer that we just have lunch?
Okay, fair.
Yeah.
Just
I know
be-
that was a random question.
Just be a human being. If you're taking someone out to lunch, you're taking them out to lunch, and you're gonna have a conversation.
Yeah.
If you sneak in some advice.
So section 13B of this contract. Yeah. Yeah.
Layla, thank you so much for joining
Yeah,
us.
thanks, guys.
It's truly a pleasure
Sure.
and an
Yeah.
honor to have you here.
You committed to every week, right? Is that what I heard?
Yeah,
at
I'll
the
be here
beginning
next
of the
Friday,
show?
yeah.
That means I can go on vacation
Yeah.
again.
I'll actually be in Toronto next Friday, but anytime you guys invite me, I'll be here.
Oh shit! What are we doing next Friday?
We were going to talk about that once the cameras were off.
Oh. Okay.
But
We'll talk about that when the camera.
who knows what's going to happen next? I'm in Vancouver. You're at New West.